agency relationship. An agency relationship is when one party employs another party to act on their behalf. Now, agency relationships aren't just real estate agency relationships. Anytime one party employs another to act on their behalf, to represent them, that's an agency relationship. It could be a relationship with an attorney. It could be a relationship with a real estate professional. It could be maybe your talent. Maybe you're an actor or you're a musician, and you have an agent that represents you. They go out and find places for you to work. Did you ever see Jerry Maguire? Jerry Maguire's firm was an agent for the football player whose name escapes me right now. I know it's Cuba Gooding, but I can't remember the character's name. So that's agency. Of course, we're interested in agency relationships as they relate to real estate, but we're going to learn just basic agency stuff. Now, if you're taking a licensing course, what is it you seek? What do you want to become? You want to become a real estate agent. This is of prime importance. This territory will be heavily tested if you're taking a real estate exam. You can count on it. So, parties to an agency relationship. The principal. The principal is the person who employs another to act on his or her behalf. So go ahead and highlight that. Now, the principal may or may not be the person who pays the agent, all right, especially in the real estate world. You might be hired to represent a buyer. It's very possible that the broker that represents you is going to be paid by the listing agent. So the principal is the one who employs, not necessarily the one who pays. That's a key point. The other key point is the agent, one who is employed to represent the principal. Notice also the word fiduciary. First time you've heard it here. The Latin root of the word is fid, F-I-D, or fide, F-I-D-E, maybe fide. Think of all the words that have that word, that fid as its root. Confidence, confidentiality, my confidant, fidelity, fiduciary, FIDO, my loyal and trusted friend. FID relates to a relationship built on trust and confidence. Fiduciary duties are the highest duties that you owe to your principal. Now, a third party is anybody who's outside of an agency relationship. Third party, like a party to a transaction who's not represented by you. So you're holding an open house. You're representing the seller. Customers walk through the door to look at the house. They're third parties. In agency law, we're saying they are third parties. I owe them honesty and fair dealing. I owe the person I represent a whole lot more than I owe third parties. I have a fiduciary relationship, which we're going to define for you here in just a second or two. I have a fiduciary relationship with my client, the seller. I owe you honesty and fair dealing. How can I help? My job is to sell my seller's home. I don't represent you. All right? Remember, I'm Rolf Kurtajka with ABC Realty. Welcome to the Smith residence. ABC Realty is representing them and selling their property. How can I be of service? Facilitator, transaction broker. You know, we got to sneak this in somewhere, so we're going to put it right here. In some cases, people don't want representation, but they don't know really how to go about selling their property. They don't know the steps they should take. So they could hire a licensee, not for representation, but they could hire as what we call a facilitator. In some states they'll call it a transaction broker, and some states don't allow this. They provide services, but not representation. Now they're going to hire the brokerage firm to do this. Remember, they can't hire a salesperson. Salespeople don't really exist in the world. Where salespersons are simply representing the brokerage. Now, it's a non-agency relationship, but the facilitator is a licensee. But you're not providing representation, therefore you're not providing fiduciary duties. couple of examples. Let's say that I'm selling my property and I already know, but we want to make sure we're using the right paperwork and stuff like that. I might hire you to facilitate the transaction. I might hire your firm and through you to facilitate the transaction. Make sure do you have a contract we could use? Oh yeah, here's the contract that we use. Contingencies and things like that. We have forms for addendums and amendments and all that kind of stuff. Another one is, I'm pretty much a player. Maybe I'm a commercial real estate agent, so I'm really good at negotiating. I love bringing down the hammer and cutting the best deal that I can. But I don't know anything about how the residential business works. Could you put me on the multiple listing service? Could you provide a sign for me? Could you provide blank forms that I could use? You go, sure, we can do a facilitation agreement. We're not going to represent you, my firm, but we will provide these services. Now, right, I'll put your property on the multiple listing service, but I'm going to put right in the comments, seller has chosen to represent themselves. Do not call this agent. Here's how you contact the seller. I'm not representing you. I'm just providing services. The licensee will not negotiate for or provide fiduciary duties, will not operate on behalf of the person going to be a facilitator. There might be some required by state law. It's often confidentiality. You have to maintain the confidentiality of the person signing the facilitator agreement with you. Again, facilitation is not an option in all states, and I want you to make sure you know that by both terms. Facilitator, transaction broker. Sometimes I have test takers come back to me and say, Rolf, we never talked about transaction broker in class. There it is. Number 4, page whatever it is. Facilitator or transaction broker. They equal each other. Just depends on what your state calls it. So this idea of fiduciary duties. The common law agency specifies fiduciary duties. And we have an acronym to help you remember this, and our acronym is OLDCAR. OLDCAR. Now, common law. I want to talk a little bit about what common law is. Common law might be different than state statute. Nobody wrote common laws. Common laws came down through centuries. Maybe, as far back as you can go in the records. Perhaps you might find this idea of fiduciary relationships. The research I did went all the way to the time of the Romans, when people hired people to represent them, hire people to represent them in doing something. And what happens is, we end up having court cases that people sue one another in court cases, come in front of a judge, and they make a ruling, and that gets set down. And that can become precedents. And then there's another court case, another court case, another court case. And we get this history of precedents. And it becomes common practice that here's the way we do things. Here is what an agent owes. And this is based upon generations of court findings, of generations of precedents. No one ever wrote the law. It evolved. That's what common law is. And we've got OLDCAR as our acronym. Obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable care and skill. Once again, the fiduciary duties owed by an agent to the principal can follow the acronym OLDCAR. Obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable care and skill. The first one is obedience. You have to do what your principal tells you to do. You might not agree with it. You might say, I don't think that's a good thing to do. Do it anyway. Okay, this is often a lowball offer. You know it's not going to get accepted. You know the market better than they do. But everybody thinks they're a player when they're selling real estate. Yeah, this is just going to start the dance. I'd expect him to counter, but I'm this kind of guy. Huh? Been around there, young fella. I know what it means. So I know they're asking 300. Let's come in at 150. They never want to talk to you again. They don't understand that. I can't tell you how many times people have told me to write an offer at half price. Let's see if they start dancing a little bit. An agent must obey the lawful directions of the principal. You never have to obey an unlawful request. If the principal asks the agent to do something unlawful, well, boom, breach of contract. Because they hired you with an agency agreement, and in that agency agreement, you told them, hey, I'm not going to break the law on your behalf, pal. All right? So you say, I cannot do that, Or you even, if they ask you before before you have this listing, you say, I'm going to decline, I'm not going to do that. Or maybe even cancel listing, talk to your broker. They want me to do this, I'm not going to do that. All right? A contract for illegal purpose is a void contract, it's unenforceable. So let's say the seller says, I don't want you to show this property to Catholics. I don't like Catholics. I don't want you to show it to, I'm Ukrainian, so I often use Ukrainian as an example. I don't want you to show it to Ukrainians. I don't want to show it to people that are white, black, or whatever color they might be. That's illegal. You cannot follow that direction. Decline the listing or talk to your broker about, we're going to cancel this listing because they want me to do something illegal. Or maybe they'll change their mind when you say, I simply can't do that. Now, if you want to do that, you're going to have to do it on your own. The L in old car is loyalty. This is one that's very important. This might be the most important of all the fiduciary duties. You put the agent's interests, let me change my way I'm saying that. The client's interests are above all others, including the agent's interest. An agent must place the interest of the principal, the client, above all others, including the agent's own interest. Especially put the client before yourself. Always put the client first. An example, an agent is obligated to show a buyer all properties that meet the buyer's requirements, not just the ones that pay the highest commission. Well, that one's got a lower commission paying. I'm not going to show it to him. That's against the law. Loyalty says, I need to solve your problem. I'm going to show properties that best fit your need, not my needs, not the agent's need. You're supposed to be an advocate for the principal. Now, sometimes this is a lot easier to mess up on than you might think, and I've seen it happen quite a bit, right? Where the agent doesn't quite understand this, and it's almost like they're trying to do something for the buyer when the seller is their agent. Maybe the buyer's a friend of theirs or something. Always have to remember, the best interest of your client comes first, not the best interests of third parties. You must be an advocate for the principal. You're on their side. You're their transaction bodyguard. Disclosure. You owe disclosure to everybody in the transaction. You owe more disclosure to your client. Disclose to the principal and all parties all known material facts about the property. Your job is to make sure that everybody knows material facts about the property. Now, physical material facts, let's say you're representing the seller. Physical material facts, you got to make sure your seller does the seller's property disclosure. And if there's something left out of that, then you give that material fact disclosure about this property condition. You have to go above and beyond that for your principal. Full disclosure to the principal of all knowledge about the transaction. Not just the material limited fact, not just the material facts about the property's condition. You must go over and above that disclosure for your principal. All right, you represent the seller, let's say. We know we've got to disclose material facts about the property and perhaps a few other things, depends on your state law, to buyers. Make sure your principal knows that, right? But if you're holding an open house and the buyer comes in and after you've told the buyer, don't tell me anything about your price, terms, motivations, because understand, I'm a pipeline of information, buddy. I'm a pipeline of information to the seller. That's my client. Pretend the seller is standing right here. How can I help you? Well, I can qualify for a $270,000 loan. Why'd you tell me that? Right? Is that pertinent to your seller? Yes, it is. Now, some states might say you got to keep third-party information confidential. Most states don't. And now I'm bound to tell my seller, hey, this guy can qualify. That's what he told me. That's pertinent information for my seller. It's not a material fact about the property. I owe more disclosure to my principal than I do others in the transaction. Listing agent must share the seller concerns about the buyer's ability to qualify for a loan. They're looking at $400,000 homes, making offers, and they tell you for some reason that they make $1,000 a month. They might not qualify for that loan. A buyer's agent should share with the buyer concerns about the property's condition and recommend expert evaluation. Look, there's water stains on the ceiling. Seller's property report doesn't show anything about water leaks. Water generally flows downhill. So I'm thinking there might be some kind of issue or was an issue with the roof. I suggest you get that looked at. I suggest you have an expert look at that. So disclosure to the principal of the benefits and the transaction as well as the risks or possible defects of a transaction. Again, we're talking about disclosure. The next one is confidentiality. Now, gang, I didn't tell you this earlier, but I want all of these old cars highlighted. I want obedience highlighted, know a little bit about it, loyalty, that you put your client's interest ahead of all others, including your own. Highlight that. Disclosure should be highlighted. All these things you're writing in, they should be highlighted. An agent must keep the principal's confidential information private. This is often defined as price, terms, and motivation. So go ahead and write that in there. Confidential information is often described as price, terms, and motivation. PTM. Must keep this confidential forever. I want you to highlight number 1, price, terms, and motivation. So what does the C stand for in old car? Confidentiality. What do you mean? I got to get my principal's price, terms, and motivation, confidential information. Confidential. How long? Forever. I got to do it forever. Let's say you're listing the property. Seller says, I'm going to list it for that, but honestly, I'd take that. Something less. Listing expires, didn't sell. A couple of weeks later, you're presenting a buyer. Oh, look, the property's back on the market with another brokerage. You already know the seller's bottom line. Can you disclose that to your buyer? No, never, because you must keep that price, terms, and motivations of that person forever, even though they're not your client anymore. The only way you can release confidential information, such as price, terms, and motivation, is with written permission from the principal. You ever see those signs? Motivated seller? I can't share that unless I've got written permission from the seller, my principal, to do so. A is accounting. So if I give you an offer, right, and I am your client, and I give you my offer and it's accompanied by an earnest money check, you're responsible for that earnest money check. All right, it's in your possession, and until you get it to where it belongs, which would be the listing broker, you're responsible about it. You're accountable. You have to provide an accounting for any money or personal property entrusted to you. And then finally, reasonable care and skill. This is not very well defined, is it? But we all kind of get what we mean. You're supposed to know more than the average person. You're supposed to have a higher knowledge of expertise. You're supposed to know what disclosures could be made. So you have to provide everybody, not just your clients, but everybody in the transaction with a reasonable level of care and skill. Reasonable care and skill. So agents owe fiduciary duties to their clients. Fiduciary duties, a relationship based upon trust and confidence. Common law has come to define these using 6 words. And our acronym to remember this is old car. So what does the O stand for? The O stands for obedience. Obedience. I have to obey the lawful directions given to me by my principal. Now, would I have to follow their unlawful directions? No, I can't follow their unlawful directions. I have to let them know that's unlawful, and I can't do it. Might have to cancel the listing if you're asking me to do something unlawful, or I won't take your listing if you're asking me to do something unlawful. Whose interest does an agent put first? Their own interest, someone else's interest, or their client's interest? That's right, you always put the client's interest first. What's that called? That's called loyalty. Loyalty, putting the client's interest ahead of all others, especially the agent's own interest. So what does the D stand for? The D stands for disclosure, right? What do I have to disclose? This is a two-way arrow. First of all, I have to make sure my seller, if I'm representing the seller, does all of the proper seller's disclosures. Even if I'm representing the buyer, I have to tell the seller if they haven't made seller disclosure, you're required by state law to make a seller's property disclosure. All right, so that's all about disclosure of material facts. we have to make sure the buyer gets all material fact disclosures and any other disclosures made in a timely manner. Now, from my client's perspective, I have to go over and above what's required by law in terms of disclosures. Seller, if you're my client, I owe you a disclosure of anything that I know that's pertinent to this transaction. So if I'm representing a seller, I have disclosures I have to make to the buyer. My seller has disclosures that they need to make to the buyer. My job is to make sure all those statutory disclosures get made. Then, from my seller's perspective, I owe them more than what the law requires in terms of disclosures about property. I need to disclose with them everything I know about the transaction. Hey, seller, properties they're sitting on the market like 45 days, right? That's a pretty short market time, so it's pretty much a seller's market right now, so let me be a little aggressive, or whatever you think it might be. Disclosure. Space. What does the C stand for? I have to keep what? Confidential. The C stands for confidentiality. And what do I have to keep confidential? If you had to come up with three things, what is it? Price, terms, and motivations. How long do I have to keep those confidential? Forever. What if you're working for the buyer's interested in a property that you had listed at one point but didn't close? The buyer says, hey, what do you think he'd take? You used to represent him. What'll he take? Can't tell you. Even though I now represent you and I'm loyal to you, my duty of confidentiality says I can't tell. Sometimes buyers will come back to you after the contract is been discharged, after the contract of the property has been bought. Executed was the word I was looking for. Hey, would he have taken less? My client's price, terms, and motivations are confidential. If you want to find that out, maybe ask the client. A stands for what? Accounting. You're accountable for any money or personal property that's placed in your hands, whether it's your client or not your client. And then R is what? R is what level of skill do you owe your client? Reasonable level of skill. Now, if you're thinking, well, what does that mean? You're going down the wrong path, right? If you're ever going to ask a court to determine what's reasonable, they're not going to come down on your side, all right? That's ambiguous by design. You're supposed to know what types of disclosures must be made and the steps that must be taken in the transaction. You're supposed to know about those contracts and so forth. It's reasonable to expect that a licensee would have that information. Agents' duties of third parties. I like to always say honesty and fair dealing, but there's a little bit more than that we might want to put in here. So we've got this acronym, DAH. Remember DAH. And that stands for disclosure, accounting, and honesty, I believe. So one of the things about disclosure, hi, I'm Rolf Kurtyka. I'm with ABC Realty. You should not share confidential information with me because I'm representing the seller. At the first substantive contact, states require that we make an agency disclosure, who I am and what I'm doing. It's at the first substantive contact. I want you to put a star by that, highlight it. If I'm working for somebody, I got to tell you not to disclose confidential information because I'm legally bound to disclose anything you share with me about the transaction to my client. The agent's fiduciary duties would require disclosure of any of that information, price, terms, and motivations that you give me. I'd have to disclose that to my principal. You're a third party. I owe you honest, fair dealing. Must disclose material facts that are known or should be known about the property. Even if the principal seller asked me to lie or keep silent, I always have to make sure that the buyer gets whatever material fact disclosure they're supposed to get per state law. The seller is required to make a material fact disclosure. If anything's missing from that material fact disclosure, I got to point it out. Anything's incorrect, I got to point it out. Disclosure is even required if the property is being sold as is. All right? As is simply means the seller is not going to fix anything. The state law is going to say the seller still has to disclose about the physical condition of the property. As is means I'm not going to fix anything. Here's what the state of the property is. Here's what's broken, but I'm not going to fix it. That's what as is means. So don't be fooled if a test question asks you, hey, you don't have to make a disclosure if the property is being sold as is, do you? Yes, you do. Here's the seller disclosure statement. And sellers, by saying I'm going to sell it as is not going to fix anything that you want them to fix. There's the A in our DA, accounting. You must account for all funds or personal property that's entrusted to your possession. An earnest money check is a good example of that. Then honesty and fair dealing. Agents must not lie to the customer or misrepresent or defraud or anything like that. Honesty and fair dealing. So what do I owe my clients? Old car. What do I owe third parties? Duh. Right? Disclosure, accounting, and honesty. There we go. Here's my little graphic to help you remember this. Agents owe customers disclosure, accounting, and honesty. Now remember, disclosure goes a two-way street. If I'm representing a seller, I disclose material facts to the buyers. I disclose more information than that under disclosure in old car to my clients. But to customers, material fact disclosure and any other disclosures that are required by state law. Scope of an agent's authority. Now this is going to be created by a special contract, and we've got a limited scope. If I had a whiteboard here, I'd draw a triangle. And the base of the triangle represents the scope of my authority. So I got a triangle, and I got 3 levels of authority. Special agency, I have the most limited scope in an agency relationship. In a general agency, I've got more scope. In universal agency, I've got entire scope of this agency relationship. Let's take a look. Special agency. Hi, Special Agent Rolf Kurtyka. The special agent is authorized to perform a particular act without the ability to bind the principal contractually. This is your firm's and by default your relationship with a real estate client, a buyer or a seller. Special agency. You can't sign the contract for them, but you can bring them to the point where they sign the contract. Help me buy a house. Help me sell a house. Help me find a place to rent. You can't sign the contract for me. You can't accept an offer for me. You can't bind me contractually, but help me. Help me buy, help me sell, help me rent. Special agency. So have it highlighted, you see the star. The relationship of a seller to the listing brokerage firm is a special agency. The relationship of a buyer to the buyer's brokerage firm is a special agency. Help me sell my property. Help me find a property to buy. You cannot sign a contract for me. You cannot bind me contractually to a sale contract. All right? Special agency. So there's a graphic. As you can see here, we've got 2 brokers. One's representing the seller, one's representing the buyer. Those brokerages, those firms, and their clients who are looking to buy, looking to sell, looking for a place to rent, that's a special agency. A special agency. Now, a general agency is above and beyond a special agency. This is often related, to an ongoing business relationship. The agent is authorized to perform a series of acts associated with the continued operation of a particular business. Now, think about working for your brokerage firm. It's not a one and done, help me do one thing. It's not special agency. It's going to be an ongoing business relationship. The firm's going to say, I authorize you to go find Rays of Hope, RAs, representation agreements. Go get listings on our behalf. Go find buyers we can represent. Do that on our behalf, on my behalf, on the brokerage's behalf. And do this for a long time. Go forth and prosper. General agency. The agent is authorized to perform a series of acts that have to do with the continued operation of a particular business. So that's the agency that you would enter into with a brokerage firm. Now you have the limited ability to bind your brokerage firm contractually. Like what? You're going to sign listing agreements. You're going to sign buyer representation agreements. You're going to sign tenant rep agreements. You're doing so on behalf of your firm, but you are binding your firm to that listing contract, to that buyer rep contract, to that tenant rep contract by your signature on behalf of ABC Realty. They give you the limited authority to bind the firm contractually. Salesperson or a broker associate to the employing broker. This is a general agency. Salesperson may sign listings on behalf of the brokerage and buyer representation on behalf of the brokerage. Now, what other type of agency relationship could a real estate brokerage get involved with? Let's see, I know they help buyers, I know they help sellers. Isn't there a brokerage function where somebody might say, hey, I own this apartment building, or I own this shopping center, or I own this office building. Would you manage that building for me? And that means you can hire people to do service work there. You can enter into maintenance agreements on my behalf. You can even sign leases, and sometimes the owner will say, you could sign leases on my behalf. Now, the only person that can be a property manager is a brokerage firm. Salespeople, salespersons, licensed salespersons cannot say, yeah, I'll be your property manager. No. My firm will be the property manager. I'll be the one that you work with representing my firm. But the agreement is with my brokerage firm. So would you say then that a property management agreement is an ongoing business relationship? These things might be 12 months, 24, 36 months long. Absolutely. Property manager to a property owner, that's a general agency. The property manager is going to have a limited authority to bind the principal. The principal may allow them to sign leases. And like I said, service agreements, hire outside contractors to do maintenance and repairs and so forth. All right? General agency. So here you go. If you're looking at the brokerage firm, the relationship between employing brokers, managing brokers, the brokerage firm, and their salespersons, broker associates, is one of general agency. Ongoing business relationship, limited authority to bind the principal. The next level that we're going to concern ourselves with is universal agency. You might have heard of power of attorney. Well, this is what that is. Essentially, in power of attorney is being a granting of universal agency where, in essence, the agent is authorized to perform in place of the principal. Your duty is to act in their best half. This often comes up when a person's no longer to represent themselves. Maybe they've lost mental capacity, Alzheimer's, something like that, and somebody takes over their life for them, essentially. The agent has the unlimited ability to bind the principal. Anything that agent does must be in the best interest of the person who gave them this power of attorney. You don't be self-serving here. You do whatever is in the best interest of the person who granted you this universal agency. The agent's authority comes from a legal document, a legal form called a power of attorney form. Maybe you can go on the internet tonight and you can look up one of those forms. In the state I live in, the state publishes a blank form that you can use for power of attorney. It does a great job of educating you about what's involved with that. Now, gang, you're going to probably bump into this in your career. You're going to bump into people that are representing maybe their mom or their dad, or might be a real estate agent representing someone, and they've been given power of attorney. Right? So you might be dealing with a son or a daughter who's not the owner, but they have power of attorney, and there's going to be things that you have to do as you go about working with that person. There's going to be certain contractual things. It's an interesting topic. Make sure you involve your broker anytime you're working with the power. Are you the seller? No, I'm not the seller. I'm the attorney in fact. The power of attorney appoints an attorney in fact. Oh, I better talk to my broker about ramifications of this. The agent legally replaces the principal. The agent can accept and reject offers and even sign for the principal. All right, so power of attorney, universal agency. Someone's been given or granted power of attorney. That person is known as an attorney in fact. The agent replaces the principal. Now I want all that highlighted. You saw it was starred. I want to make sure you've got all that highlighted. A special or general agent. Now this is kind of new, so I think this is important. A special or general agent can become a universal agent with written power of attorney from the principal. There may be a lot of different reasons why that can occur, but we're not going to go into the reasons. All I want you to know at this point is that you might already be a special agent or a general agent, and the person's come to trust you, and for whatever reason, they need to grant you power of attorney to carry on their affairs for them.